And we're picking up on the second half of Dr. Carlos Hill's Beyond the Rope, the impact of lynching on black culture and memory. Now, again, I had a completely different expectation when I agreed to do the review of this particular book. And I guess it's a good thing because, you know, when you get something new, you stretch yourself out. I was probably functioning in my comfort zone. Again, just to give a real quick summary, this book made it a point to point out first that lynching existed within the black culture before it became a symbol of white supremacy. That was the first thing that it really made a huge point to push through. Now, it did not talk about how common lynching was, and it did not compare lynching in the white community as lynching was done in the black community. It made it almost appear that lynching came from the black community, and they only stopped because white people started lynching black people, and there became it became unpopular within the black culture, as though it was formally communicated not to lynch anymore. So the only reason black people stopped lynching, per Dr. Hill, is because white people began to do it, and they didn't want to encourage white people lynching black people. Broke it down, 3 different parts, comparing newspapers, the narratives in newspapers, the narratives in literature, and narratives in oral histories. Felt that 2 genres were created by black people to represent blacks in lynching. One was a victim, and one was consoling, as to where, in the words that he used, was the I want to see it exactly, the black agency. And in this book, he used agency to mean the ability to protect, of the black people's ability to protect themselves or their property. That's what their agency was, their power. And it was not represented as though this was the other perspective. Every time that these genres of consolation or victimization was brought up, the words crafted, developed, words that made it seem artificial, that it was a move of strategy almost, as opposed to sincerity. It's as opposed to journalists and people in literature representing a true perspective. It was written as though the blacks between 1880 and 1930, which is lynching's decades of its greatest popularity, it appeared as though he was trying to represent this as a fallacy, a purposeful misrepresentation of facts, and it being to the convenience of black people. I found that very odd. There were a couple of principles. There were a few principles that he rested his work on. He felt that black authored lynching narratives sought to shape black attitudes toward the lynched black body. Principle 2 is the floating signifier. In this, he says, this book argues that the lynched black body in the black cultural imagination is best understood as a floating signifier. A floating signifier, with a floating signifier, there is nothing solid or permanent to the meaning. So this floating signifier is not saying that this is how black people saw lynching. He implies or states that black people changed the narrative of lynching as it was convenient to their power base or base of influence, which is odd. Third principle was the black vigilantism, as to where there was this heavy weight of culpability and cooperation, and particularly, he writes, they also participated in vigilante, they being black people, participated in vigilante violence. Now, if you're going to call it vigilante violence, fine, let's take Hill's perspective at face value. Communities police themselves. There were no black police. They couldn't commit a crime unless it was against white people because they weren't people. So if they were correcting something within their community, just as white people had done, why is that being made equivalent to people being lynched for entertainment and dismembered and sold by pieces, and people coming from miles around to watch it? And he depicts it as though the events were equal. Like black people got on the horn and said, hey guys, come, we're going to have this big lynching. And hundreds of people came, and it was that's why you need to watch the term picnics. People came and ate, and that's what picnic came from. Look that up. But we'll keep going. We'll keep going. He makes an assertion that the year 1886 is important because it was the first time since lynching statistics began to be compiled that the number of recorded black lynch victims exceeded the total number of white lynch victims. If people were considered less than human, because we got to remember in the 1960s, they still had signs talking about I'm a man. This is not 1964. We haven't gotten the civil rights crime bill. We haven't gotten the civil rights bill and the voter rights bill. We haven't gotten that yet. So these people still are at best second-class citizens. Why would people, how can we say with any degree of certainty or confidence that in the 1800s, the height of Jim Crow, I mean, arguably, we would say that records of black murders were being kept up? You have to remember, they were trying to bury Emmett Till before he got brought up to Chicago. So I think that the foundation is pretty weak. It's pretty weak. Here's another principle: the racialization of lynching. That's the turning point that he said race and lynching became synonymous as we got to the later 1880s. We're going to go ahead and stop this video on time. We're going to do part 3.